very first piece that we wanted to break down were the legs. Now our legs are going to be a little bit shorter than 22 inches, but we're going to cut them at 22 just to make sure everything is down to rough length and we can finalize our dimensions later. And when working with darker woods such as walnut, it's very hard to see standard graphite, so we always suggest using something like a white colored pencil to make all of your marks much more visible. We use our circular saw in combination with our speed square to cut down the legs to rough length. And once the leg stock was cut to rough length, we then use the same process on the tabletop pieces and the aprons, first measuring out the rough length, then using our speed square and circular saw to cut the pieces to rough length. After breaking down the stock into rough size, we moved over to the table saw to start trimming our boards to make up the tabletop. Now since the stock we purchased is S3S, meaning the top, bottom, and one edge are surfaced and smooth, our first order of business was to make a very small pass on the rough edge of the board to make it perfectly flat and smooth. And more importantly, our second order of business was to practice our free throws. We then laid all of our boards for the tabletop out and figured exactly how we wanted to arrange them. To help keep the tabletop flat, we grabbed some scrap pieces of wood and covered them in clear packing tape to prevent glue from sticking to them. These are called caul boards. Now we are going to use dowels to help align the boards as we glue them up, so we made a series of marks on the table where we wanted these dowels to go. Last time I used this doweling jig, I did not tighten the stop collar down enough and ended up drilling through my finger and spent the day in the ER. Don't do what I did, just tighten it down. This doweling jig is super easy to use. Just align the guide with the marks made on the tabletop and drill into the boards to make your dowel holes. Now this step is completely optional, but we always find it makes the boards stay in alignment much better during the glue up. When all the dowel holes were drilled, we then filled the holes with glue and placed in the dowels. And while we glue up the table, we want to remind you that we have a free cut list available at our website or at the link in the description below. We left the tabletop to dry overnight and moved on to cutting the pieces for the apron of the table. Now since they're the same width, we cut both the short and the long aprons at the same time to make sure they were identical widths. Again, we first made a pass that was about 1/8 of an inch larger than our final size, and then came back for a second cut to bring it exactly to 2.5 inches wide. Moving on from the aprons, we brought our leg stock over to the table saw. Now since we want these legs to be square, we adjusted our table saw fence to be slightly wider than the thickness of our stock, and then came back for a second cut to get a perfect square. With that, all of our pieces were ripped down to final width, and we were ready to cut all the pieces down to the final length using our beat up old crosscut sled on the table saw. We first made one small cut to get a 90-degree reference edge and then marked out our final length for the short apron. Back at the table saw, we clamped the two short aprons together to ensure they were the exact same length, and then took a series of cuts to slowly sneak up on the proper cut line. The longer aprons were no different. We measured out the final length and then cut them down over at the table saw. While we move on to cut the legs down to final length, we want to remind you to head over to Instagram and follow us at Spenceley Design Co. There you can find behind the scenes pictures and videos of all the projects we are working on. You can also send us a message with any questions you might have, as we love to talk to everybody in the community. To add a little bit of flair to the legs, we marked where we wanted our taper to begin and end on each leg. We decided that we wanted a very subtle taper, ending 3/8 of an inch into the end of one leg and 1 inch down from the apron, and then brought our legs over to our tapering jig. Now if you want to build one of these for yourself, check out the link in the top right corner. The jig is incredibly easy to use. You just line up your cut lines with the edges of the jig, tighten down the clamps, and then run your workpiece through the table saw to get a perfect taper. The best part is that once the cut is set up, you can repeat it over and over again without any adjustments, leaving every single leg the exact same. And once one of the sides was tapered, we rotated the leg 90 degrees to cut another taper on the adjacent edge. Now just make sure to keep the flat face running on the plywood jig and not have the taper be on the bottom. To finish off the legs, we put a very small chamfer bit in our cordless router and routed a profile along the bottom of each leg. This will cast a very subtle shadow as well as prevent the wood from splitting when the table is moved. And to finish off the aprons, we brought out our pocket hole jig. Since the aprons are 3/4 of an inch thick, we adjusted the drill bit collar and the jig itself to accommodate this size stock. We took some time to figure out which faces of the boards we liked the best, and then marked the areas where we wanted to drill the pocket holes. Here's another example of where I didn't take the time to fully tighten the drill bit collar down. Luckily, this didn't result in me going to the ER, but more importantly, didn't result in a destroyed piece. And even though I can't actually use a pocket hole screw in this hole, it's all good because no one will ever know it's there. Well, except for the people who watch this video. So after that happy accident, we proceeded on and drilled the rest of the pocket holes correctly this time, without drilling entirely through any of the boards. By now, the tabletop was done drying, so we took off all the clamps. And you can see how well the packing tape worked in keeping the glue from sticking to the caul boards. And although we used dowels to help align the tabletop, there were a few spots that were not perfect, so we hit the table with the belt sander to get everything perfectly level. We also noticed a few hairline gaps, so we filled those gaps with a little bit of glue and then mixed in sawdust to perfectly blend in. These are virtually invisible as long as you save some of the sawdust from the project that you're currently working on. And once the glue dried, we just sanded the spots down and we were good to go. Just to show how well this trick works, we took the camera directly off the tripod, and as you can see, it's almost impossible to see where the gap was. This is a lot easier than buying store-bought wood filler. With the top in better shape, we moved over to the table saw to rip it down to the final width of 22 inches wide. Now that we know both sides are parallel on the tabletop, we are ready to cross-cut it to final length. Now the easiest way to do a crosscut on a board that's this unwieldy is to use a circular saw and a straight edge. Our circular saw measures 4.5 inches from the blade to the base plate, so we marked 4.5 inches away from our desired cut line and clamped a straight edge to our board. We then ran the circular saw along the straight edge to get a perfectly straight line. Then repeat for the other side of the table after marking the desired length, and you're ready to move on to the most exciting part of the build. If you're liking the project so far and want to stay up to date with all of our future projects, don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a future build. After coming back to reality, we sanded down the edge of the tabletop and then put a Roman OG bit into our router to start making an edge profile.
Now you want to make sure that whenever you're doing an edge profile with a router, that you always start with the end grain first. That way, if you have any tear out that would occur right here, you can fix it on your second pass when you go along the long edge of the board.
We made a series of passes with the router, each time lowering the bit progressively lower until we reached the final profile that we wanted. Now looking back, we probably could have actually done this in one pass since the bit is pretty small, but we wanted to make sure we didn't get any tear out. With the tabletop now completely finished, we moved on to assembling the base. We used a scrap piece of 1/4 inch plywood to set the apron on so that there was a small recess from the leg. We then applied glue, clamped the pieces together, and used pocket holes to attach the apron to the leg. After the smaller aprons were attached, we used a damp rag to clean up any glue squeeze out and moved on to attaching the longer aprons. This followed the exact same process as before, where we would glue, clamp, and screw the pieces together. And to attach the tabletop to the base, we made some walnut buttons. Up at the top right of your screen, you can check out the full video of how we made these buttons. After putting a slot cutting bit in our router, we adjusted the height so it was just slightly taller than our buttons. And moving over to our base, we routed slots for the buttons to rest in. We started by clamping some extra scrap pieces to the edge of the base. The whole reason we're doing this is that they'll serve as supports to give the base of the router something more substantial to rest on. We made each slot approximately 3 inches wide, but it really doesn't matter how long the slots are as long as there's ample room for the buttons to move around. And really the whole reason we're using buttons instead of screwing into the tabletop directly is because the solid wood tabletop will expand and contract with the seasonal changes, and the buttons will allow the expansion and contraction to freely occur as long as the slots are big enough for the buttons to actually move around a bit. And after all the slots were cut into the base, we did our favorite part, applying the finish. Seeing all of the character in the wood come alive when the first coat of finish gets put on never gets old. Now we chose to actually finish before assembly just because it was so much easier to reach around all the corners. And once the finish was cured, we were ready to attach the base and top together with the buttons. Installation of the buttons is super easy. Simply align your tabletop, pre-drill a hole, and then drive your screw into the table. Double, triple, and quadruple check that you're not pre-drilling too deep and that your screws are not going to poke through your tabletop after all the hard work you've put in. And after attaching the remainder of the buttons, this table was done. We're so happy with how this table turned out and we cannot wait to deliver it. The only mistake we made on this table was not tightening down the collar on the pocket hole drill bit enough and blowing through the end of one of the aprons. Luckily, this had no negative effect on the outcome of the table since you can't even see it.